From the Oklahoman newsroom, it's time for the Red Zone, Spring Football Edition. I'm Jenny Carlson here in studio with fellow columnist Barry Trammell and OU beat writer Ryan Aber. Guys, spring ball is over for the Sooners. Had a game, had a final practice. Now it's done, into the offseason they go. But Ryan, obviously, two big questions. We're going to hit on them both. Quarterback situation and the defense. Obviously, Alex Grinch's first extended time with these guys on defense. They've instituted the defense. They've started the process. But to hear Alex Grinch talk, they're nowhere close to where they want to be yet.
Yeah, which he said he's not exactly surprised with. That he said he didn't see that speed out there that it needs to be during the season. But that's sort of what he expected. That he expected sort of a slow process in getting it there. Obviously, these aren't his guys. These aren't the fast guys with size that he's recruiting out there. Now, he says he's got some tools to work with. The incoming freshmen are going to have a chance to play. But right now here, several months before the season starts, he doesn't feel comfortable with where they are defensively.
Yeah, and Barry, the spring game, it's hard to tell. Even an established defense, when you start splitting up guys, it's hard to tell what's what. But what were your impressions of what you saw from the OU defense? And then, I'm not surprised Alex Grinch basically said we're not there yet. Who would think they would be? But what did you make of his comments after what you saw?
Well, what stood out to me was I thought the OU defensive line was fairly active. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? When you factor in the offensive line for the Sooners, I don't know. It's a brand new offensive line. Everybody that played in the spring games totally new, so you don't know exactly what that meant. But I thought the DBs covered well. There weren't a lot of receivers running free, and to me, that's a good start. So I didn't see much out of the linebackers. That's a concern. But at least on a coverage standpoint, it seemed like the DBs were where they were supposed to be, and that hasn't always been the case in the past.
Yeah, and Ryan, that brings up a good point. There was obviously we saw some differences, but this whole idea of the Speed D, that whole nickname moniker that has been thrown out as what they're going to call this defense, I'm not real sure we've seen a ton of evidence. I know it's a small sample size and flawed sample size because of how the game was structured, but are we getting a sense of speed? What parts of it we think will be really honing in on that whole idea that this is a speed defense?
Well, I think it's everywhere. I think it's on the back end, like Barry was talking about, covering well, and it's not just being able to run down the field with your receiver. It's being in the right place, getting the right kind of leverage that you want to put the receivers in bad positions, things like that. It's up front with their defensive line, which they want to be more active. Barry touched on that just a second ago. The one area that Alex Grinch said he was probably most pleased with was the progress of that defensive line and them being able to be disruptive. Oklahoma's defensive line, the secondary has gotten so much attention the last few years, but their defensive line really hasn't been able to do much in terms of getting after quarterbacks and things like that. Sometimes they've had maybe one edge rusher who can do it, but they haven't been able to do it across the board. Alex Grinch said he feels pretty good about that spot. He said the depth isn't there, but he sees some strong signs that they've got a chance to be pretty good up there. And then obviously the linebackers, which Barry said, like Barry said, we didn't see much of on Friday. They've got to be really active in this defense as well.
Last thing I want to ask you guys about this defense is we head into the offseason for the Sooners. Who are the guys that are going to need to have the best offseason? Whether that's a group or individuals. Barry, on the defensive side, who's got to have a really good offseason to get ready for the fall?
Well, I think this is a prime opportunity for Deshaun White to sort of step up and become a team leader. With Caleb Kelly's injury, the Sooners are thin at linebacker. Sooners very high on Deshaun White as a freshman last year, and he responded fairly well, but a lot of promise there. This is a guy that could be a difference maker at linebacker if he continues to progress and show what he's shown in limited time. So if this guy can commit and really assert himself, there's a void there, not just for playing time, but for impact making. And I think Deshaun White's a guy that could fill that void.
Ryan?
Well, I'm going to throw out a couple at you, and I'm going to first start with the guy just to Deshaun White's side, Kenneth Murray. I think he's a guy who they need to see big-time development from. The middle linebacker in this defense has a chance to be disruptive. We haven't really seen that with Kenneth Murray much over the last 2 years. He's been solid at times, but hasn't been able to really be, that big impactful presence in the middle of the linebacker group. And then on the back end, I'm going to say a guy like Parnell Motley, the guy we've seen a lot, has struggled at times, has made plays. They need him to be much more consistent on the back end. And if Parnell Motley has a really good offseason and is ready to be their best defender on the back end, they're going to feel pretty good about that secondary.
All right, lots that will now go behind closed doors, and we won't have a chance to see it for many, many moons. But guys, the other big question this spring was obviously the quarterback situation, the competition that's out there. We only saw this limited practice, this one spring game, but from the spring game, Barry, if that's any indication of what's happening behind closed doors at practice, Jalen Hurts looks like the guy pretty clearly.
Clearly looked that way to us. Now, others have said, Tanner Mordecai actually has looked better in some practices, so maybe so. But it's hard to come away from that game, 50,000 people, the lights on. It's hard to come away from that game saying, Jalen Hurts might not be the quarterback. It looks like an open and shut case, and that makes perfect sense. This is a guy that has quarterbacked Alabama in 28 games and has won 26 of them and has just played really well. He's the 2016 SEC Offensive Player of the Year, for crying out loud. And he's going to come to Oklahoma and sit on the bench when all the veteran quarterbacks are gone? I don't think so. So it makes sense that Jalen Hurts is going to be the quarterback, and our eyeballs certainly tell us that from what we saw Friday night.
Ryan, it does seem that way, and I, as I said, that's just one of the whole spring practice schedule. So what Tanner Mordecai, Tanner Schaefer, whoever you want to put out there, whatever they're doing in those other 14 practices, we're not seeing. But there's got to be something said for how you perform in that moment under the pressure. I know it's just a scrimmage, but man, to see the difference between those two. Maybe Mordecai is doing well in practice, but to be that off under the lights, that seems problematic to me.
Yeah, especially when Jalen Hurts can perform under the lights. It didn't take Friday night for us to know that. Like Barry said, he's quarterbacked 28 games for the Crimson Tide. He's quarterbacked in national championship games, SEC championship games, Iron Bowls, on and on and on. We haven't seen that from Tanner Mordecai or Tanner Schaefer. To this point, they both had a chance to perform in a close to a game-like atmosphere, game-like pressure situation on Friday, and especially in Mordecai's case, just didn't quite deliver. Like you said, maybe Mordecai's performing much better in the closed practices and things like that, but everything we saw from Jalen Hurts pointed to the fact that he's going to be the starting quarterback, including in the postgame, I thought, when Lincoln Riley talked about the timeline for naming a quarterback. He's been one who's waited till just 2 weeks before the season starts when Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray won the job. He said that's not necessarily the case this year. If he sees a separation, he's going to go ahead and pull the trigger. I think that's something we could see, maybe early in preseason camp.
Well, that was what I was going to ask next, is that possibility of naming a quarterback earlier than we've come to expect under Lincoln Riley. To have two Heisman Trophy candidates go down to the wire in a quarterback competition, and now Lincoln Riley's talking about, well, maybe we don't always have to do that. I don't know what that says. Maybe the previous circumstances is as much about keeping guys around. Maybe Lincoln Riley's of the mind that neither of the Tanners is going anywhere. You've got Spencer Rattler coming in. Maybe that's the different equation, or maybe that separation is just that big. I thought that was really interesting, Barry.
I did too. I tend to think Lincoln will stick with the script. I would still bet it's August before we hear anything. But you don't know. He certainly opened the door. The reason you might go earlier is if you want an established quarterback to sort of take over the summer program and assert his leadership in the 7-on-7 drills of summer. But just from an outside observer, it looks like that leadership thing has sort of been filled anyway. It looks to me like Jalen Hurts sort of walked in and said, all right, guys, here we go, follow me. I don't know if that's true, but that's what it appears. If that's the case, you wouldn't have to name him quarterback. Everybody would know.
Well, I think the other thing is when you're talking about the quarterback battle and keeping guys invested, one of the things that's going to keep these guys invested now is the battle for the backup quarterback role, because Jalen Hurts is only a one-year guy.
Right.
Spencer Rattler is coming in the summer. They think really, really highly of him. So Radler versus Mordecai and Schaefer is going to be another quarterback battle that we're going to have even after Jalen Hurts is officially the starter.
All right, let's move to one other sort of sidelight to the quarterback question, that being the guys that the presumed starter Hurts will be throwing to in the fall. It looks like he's going to have a bunch of freshmen he's throwing to, guys. Barry, you called him. What'd you call him before?
I called him the Theo Weiss Brigade.
But I think we need to change that because it appears to me that Trajan Bridges might be.
Well, I called that one too in our podcast. I think it was Ryan threw out, hey, pick out a breakout star of the game, and I threw out Trajan Bridges. So then he had a big game. And you put that under dumb luck is what you put that.
But the truth is that these guys were used. They were used in heavy rotation. CeeDee Lamb appears to, I mean, we've long said, and I think multiple of those of us sitting here have espoused his excellence. I don't think that's changed. I think CeeDee Lamb's still really good. But Ryan, I mean, OU uses a lot of receivers. They want to use a lot of receivers. It looks like those freshmen are likely to be in heavy rotation in the fall.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's not just those two guys, but obviously Jaden Hazelwood, who was a little bit banged up a couple weeks ago, made a couple good catches on Friday night as well. But the one that's really intriguing to me is Austin Stogner. We saw him make a couple of really difficult catches on Friday, and I think he's got a chance to be a different kind of weapon for this Sooners offense, even with Grant Calcaterra, even with Lee Morris, and some of those other guys at that position that they want to use pretty significantly. I think, excuse me, I think Stogner is going to find a way to make an impact.
You know, Barry, I'm not sure anybody in that receiver bunch is Marquis Brown. It doesn't look like they've got that guy. But considering what we know to this point about Jalen Hurts and what we saw in the scrimmage, I don't think that they opened up the playbook and threw everything they've got. But he's never been known as that cross-country passer. You definitely want guys with some speed to stretch the field. But if they don't have that type of guy, I mean, very few guys have the speed that Marquis Brown has, but if they don't have that guy in the receiver corps, is that a big problem?
Well, it actually might be, to your point, good timing, because it looks like the Sooners are without the home run threat that Marquis Brown was in a year when their quarterback is not necessarily a deep ball striker. Jalen Hurts has never shown that 50-yard pass talent while he was at Alabama. Maybe he's got it, and Saban just never took the shackles off. But when you got a guy like Jalen Hurts, who's more of a deliver the ball on target guy, then a Marquis Brown is not as important. Now, Marquis Brown was used extensively in all kinds of ways, including passes that didn't travel more than 5 yards, because you're throwing the short cross and he can turn it into 50. But it does look like going downfield and just somebody throwing the ball, halfway across the field is not going to be as big a part of the offense as in the past.
Ryan, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe one of those young guys is the next Marquis Brown or that next field stretcher. But it seems like they're more in the mold of a CeeDee Lamb. Not that that's a bad thing.
No, not at all. And I think that they've got some depth that while they don't have that Marquis Brown that's going to consistently get those 50, 60-yard catches, they've got depth unlike really any receiver group that Oklahoma has seen. So that's going to be really interesting to see how they spread it around. That can make things really difficult for defenses, especially defenses that still have to worry about the quarterback run game. Jalen Hurts is not Kyler Murray, but he can do some damage with his feet and certainly with his power. Okay,
before we go, guys, one wild card question. It is, as we sit here in the middle of April, it's way far out in the distance, the start of the 19 season. But where's Oklahoma fit in the Big 12 picture, the national picture? Barry, these guys have won multiple Big 12 championships, been a playoff team several times over the last couple of years. Are they in that preseason conversation when the season starts?
Yes. The Sooners are the clear favorite for the Big 12 championship, and that makes them always in the running for the college football playoff. ESPN just ran its computer numbers on the most likely playoff teams for 2019. Sooners come out fifth in that prognostication, and right on the verge of a playoff. So Sooners are in good shape for that. Texas had a breakout year in 18, but only has 8 starters back, so the Longhorns are not projected to be as strong. Who knows? Iowa State's a solid program. Oklahoma State, TCU, all kinds of teams have been good in the past, but it certainly looks like OU's the class of the Big 12 again, and that automatically would put them in the running for a playoff.
Twitter would tell you that Texas and Oklahoma are going to battle this out on the World Wide Web over the summer, Ryan. But is Oklahoma preseason the favorite in the Big 12, top 5 type of team in the country?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. Now, what I will say, their schedule maybe doesn't give them the wiggle room that they've had in the past, with UCLA not being as good as probably they will be here in a couple of years. Houston with the turnover themselves, South Dakota, they don't have that big marquee non-conference game to go out and get a signature win early in the season that would help them rebound, say if they lose to Texas or lose another Big 12 game. Now, obviously, they got the Big 12 championship game to sort of come back from if they do drop a Big 12 game, but still, I think they're there. They're certainly there in the conversation, but there's maybe a little bit less room to work than they've had in the past.
All right, everything's not perfect, everything's not fixed, but a lot of positive vibes coming out of the spring for the Sooners. We'll continue to cover their off-season, all things Sooners, so be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.